This is the story of a voyage around the world on the Clipper Stad Amsterdam. The first leg of the journey stretched from England via Cape Verde to the east coast of South America. This episode starts at the southern tip of South America. We were impressed by the extraordinary beauty of the Strait of Magellan and by the sight of one of the world's few remaining glaciers. But then we were faced with what used to be our solution to the overfishing of our oceans, salmon farms. And we ask ourselves, is it really sensible to grow fish at all when they have to be fed on wild fish? Meanwhile, Sarah was visiting the Andes, where she went looking for the seashore that so excited Darwin, a place which invited deep thoughts about deep time and deep space. In September 2009, I left Plymouth in England to embark on a great adventure. I was invited to set sail with the Clipper Stad Amsterdam and make the same journey that the young naturalist Charles Darwin undertook 179 years ago. The Beagle's circumnavigation of the Earth is the most important journey ever made, far more important than man's voyage to the moon. And I will be repeating this journey together with Darwin's great-great-granddaughter, Sarah. It's a chance of several lifetimes. Very exciting. Here are the first icebergs. Well, all right, they're very small, but all the same. Here is an ice field, and further up the channel, apparently, there's an enormous glacier. And all we have to do, I suppose, is wait, and absolutely nobody must mention the Titanic. Now this is absolutely where we are, Darwin amazed as we are. These mountains are covered by a wide mantle of perpetual snow. And numerous cascades pour their waters through the woods into the narrow channel below, where we can see that all around us. In many parts, magnificent glaciers extend from the mountainside to the water's edge. It is scarcely possible to imagine anything more beautiful than the beryl-like blue of these glaciers, and especially as contrasted with the dead white of the upper expanse of snow. The fragments which had fallen from the glacier into the water were floating away, and the channel with its icebergs presented, for the space of a mile, a miniature likeness of the polar sea. So we're in a grand tradition of being astonished. Well, it's not difficult to be astonished, is it? And his beautiful, beautiful colour is still there. We say goodbye to one of the few remaining glaciers on Earth to sail north. On board are two environmental activists, Douglas Tompkins and his wife Christine McDivitt Tompkins. Since they sold their clothing companies, Patagonia, North Face and Esprit, and became multimillionaires, they have been putting all their energy and wealth towards wildlife preservation. Their love for the Chilean landscape brought them to buy a piece of land and sustain it as a nature reserve, the Pumalin National Park.
That little triangular pyramidal peak that's just coming out of the water there, that's the southwest boundary of the Pumalin Park. All the way up as far as the eye can go. That's about 300,000 hectares there.
Tompkins' biggest frustration is the unthinking way in which we treat nature.
Why do we have an enormous environmental crisis? Because we overexploited and overshot the carrying capacity of the landscapes that we're using for exploitation.
Just next to the entrance to Pumalin National Park is a salmon farm. We used to think that farming fish would be the solution to our overfishing of the oceans. Is it really sensible to grow fish at all, given that they have to be fed on wild fish?
They've got nets hanging under these structures here, and in those nets they put young fish, small smolts, and they raise them by feeding them fish meal they've gone out to the high seas, caught a lot of anchovies and sardines, ground them up, shipped them all the way down here to South Chile, and then fatten these fish up. It takes about 5 kilos of other fish to get 1 kilo of salmon. It's an industrialization of the ocean. Wow, it's a billion-dollar industry.
As the Clipper lies at anchor by Pumalin National Park, the ship's biologist Dirk Drouwlens finds himself on a neighbouring island, Chiloé, in search of the major source of income for most Chilotans, which appears to be salmon farming.
Este es un guante de acero que se utiliza para que tú no te cortes, ¿ya? Tú te lo colocas ahí, ¿ya? Y tomas los salmones, cuando van vivos, ahí, ¿ya? Tú llegas, los levantas y después, ¿qué es lo que hacemos nosotros? Con un cuchillo se lo entierras aquí, en esta parte, y le cortas ahí para que se desangre.
Gustavo takes Dirk to the factory where he earns a living slaughtering salmon.
Y al frente, esa es la planta de proceso donde yo trabajo, ¿ya? A lo lejos se notan ese sistema, esas mangueras negras de color negro que están ahí, ¿ya? Aquí por ese sistema de tubo, cuando pasan aproximadamente pueden pasar entre 40 y 50 mil salmones en 8 horas. Y aquí lo que llega principalmente a la planta. Con 2 turnos tú puedes llegar a hacer hasta esta planta, está adaptada para pasar aproximadamente casi 100.000 piezas diarias. Cada uno de nosotros mata aproximadamente entre 800 y 900 salmones por hora. Eso significa que más o menos entre 10 horas tú estás matando entre 9.000 a 10.000 salmones durante un turno. Todos los días, como digo, se trabaja eso.
Nothing's living under these cages. There's what's called the shadow, a large shadow. It's sometimes you might have a meter-deep layer of fish feces and fish meal that's fallen down at the bottom of the sea. They bred a disease here that infected all their fish. And so for 2 or 3 years now, this all collapsed. They had to dismiss all the people that were working here. Some reports I read say that 600 times, not 600%, 600 times more antibiotics to keep these fish healthy from diseases than Norway does. It's been fish farming, you know, for a long time.
Se piensa que la industria salmonera ha traído enfermedades para el medio ambiente, o sea, para los cultivos naturales acá, como es hoy en día la marea roja. También tenemos claro que los salmones que hoy en día se cultivan en los centros de cultivo son depredadores naturales, son carnívoros. Entonces, ¿qué significa? Si tú sueltas un salmón de esto al océano o al mar, se consume toda la flora y fauna natural.
Darwin's idea of evolution, which is our way of understanding the biophysical development of nature, that's been stopped. Evolution is evolving, and we're devolving. Okay, we're going backwards because we're extincting species. And we're extincting species through our economic activities. The remedies are all to go back and adjust the system. That the system itself was okay. We just have to make some little adjustments here. We've got to have a little more regulation here, and we've got to have a little more temperance here. We've got to have a few more laws in place, but the basic system is being maintained. That is, expansion into the future is the name of the game.
One would expect this flourishing salmon industry to have led to great prosperity, but it seems not to have happened. At first glance, things seem rather bleak here, which was also the case in Darwin's time. We were all glad to leave Chiloe. Nothing but an amphibious animal could tolerate the climate. Even the inhabitants have not a word to say in its favor. Very commonly, I was asked what I thought of the island. Is it not a miserable place? I could not muster civility enough to contradict it.
Buenas.
¿Cómo está?
Dirk.
Héctor soy yo, Héctor Chihuahua.
Ok. ¿Esta es tu casa?
Esta es mi casa,
Ah,
esta
sí,
es mi
sí.
casa.
Ah.
Este es mi huerto de flores, legumbres, plantas
Linda, linda.
para la hortaliza. ¿En qué le puedo servir, caballero?
Ok, gracias. Gracias.
In his search on the island, Dirk has not come across much more than a few drunkards on the streets. He asks Hector Chigwe whether he can explain.
Bueno, esta pregunta es penosa, muy penosa. La voy a contestar. Eso del borracho en la calle, de la cesantía en Quellón, es que fue un factor momentáneo fulminante. Hubo mucha pega de salmón en Quellón, hubo mucho desastre de plata, hubo mucha plata donde no las hubo, y entonces el bolsillo sin plata se asusta. Entonces no voy a llegar más lejos porque no me corresponde esa parte. Pero se derrochó totalmente la plata en Quellón. Se ganó muchísima plata, demasiada plata y nadie se arregló para ver.
Somos unos borrachos, sabemos todo, pero no, trabajamos, hacemos embarcación y estamos ahí. Hay que sacrificarse de la vida por uno. Voy a morir así, en mi barco, la lancha de mi padre. Esta lo regaló mi padre y ahí voy a morir yo.
El borracho en la calle, nadie tiene la culpa. Es que somos incapaces. Yo me pongo en ese minuto yo. Porque si yo me dieran un proceso, una industria que sea uno industrial, no cumpliría con los reglamentos, porque lo veo claro que no se cumplieron. Porque con todas las oportunidades que ya hemos tenido, no es mal que hable mal de nadie, no pudimos hacerlo. Entonces, falta de capacidad. Nosotros nos falta mucha capacidad. No estamos en el nivel de ustedes. Son industriales, son cuidadosos, son súper héroes del progreso. Pero nosotros estamos en el más bajo nivel en cuanto a la capacidad de cuidar nuestros productos y salir con un producto fuertemente sano. Porque si yo no pude, los otros tampoco van a poder.
I am sad that we are mismanaging our fisheries so catastrophically, when the solution is so very simple: to extend the fishing limits to the center of every ocean. We still think we are hunter-gatherers. Only now, with industrial methods which have very nearly emptied our oceans. The only real solution is to farm the oceans themselves in their entirety. Every country will need to protect its limits, and looking after the young fish would come naturally. We are sailing in a region renowned for its heavy earthquakes. When Charles Darwin travelled here, he experienced at first hand how very, very frightening an earthquake can be. I happened to be on shore and was lying down in the wood to rest myself. It came on suddenly and lasted 2 minutes, but the time appeared much longer. The rocking of the ground was very sensible. There was no difficulty in standing upright, but the motion made me almost giddy. It was something like the movement of a vessel in a little cross ripple, or still more, like that felt by a person skating over thin ice, which bends under the weight of his body. A bad earthquake at once destroys our oldest associations. The earth, the very emblem of solidity, has moved beneath our feet like a thin crust over a fluid. 1 second of time has created in the mind a strange idea of insecurity, which hours of reflection would not have produced. In 1960, the Chilean coast was hit by the heaviest earthquake ever, measuring a record-breaking 9.5 on the Richter scale. 1,655 people died. After a few days of peaceful sailing, we approach Valparaiso. In the distance, the Andes mountain range beckons to us. As always, I am staying on the boat. In Valparaiso, Sarah meets up with physicist Robert Dycraft for a special trek to the mountains. They're following in Charles Darwin's footsteps. He explored here for 4 weeks, an expedition he considered to be one of the highlights of his 5-year voyage.
So it's very difficult to get a real feeling for the depth of time. So I think let's do an experiment and let's use this road as our measurement of time. So I would say 1 meter could be 1 million years. Actually, so I would say this is where we are right now.
Okay.
This is today. So like 1 centimeter would be 10,000 years. Now 10,000 years would be around the time that the first people would enter in this valley, right? So then if I would take like 2 big steps, I would roughly 2 million years.
Yeah.
So here we see man appearing. And what I now would like to do, walk all the way to the beginning of the Andes Mountains, which is 100 million years.
Okay.
So 98 more steps. 3, 4, 20. 30. 50. 60. I just passed the extinction of the dinosaurs.
Ah.
You want to come over?
Yeah, yeah. I'll come and join you.
The last step? Eight, 9, 100. Okay. So we're roughly at the birth of the Andes Mountains. It's quite remarkable that all of this once wasn't here. Actually, I want to move further on. So, say the beginning of life.
Yeah.
Well, 4 billion years. So that would be 4 kilometers. So it's an hour walk.
Right.
But I would like to take you all the way to the beginning of time, to the Big Bang.
Yeah.
And we
How
know
many
that's
kilometers is that?
that's 13.7
Right.
kilometers. So let's go.
Okay.
It's one of my favourite passages is about he's standing by a mountain torrent, yeah? Amidst the din of rushing waters, the noise from the stones as they rattled one over another was most distinctly audible, even from a distance. This rattling noise, night and day, may be heard along the whole course of the torrent. The sound spoke eloquently to the geologist. The thousands and thousands of stones, which striking against each other made the one dull, uniform sound, were all hurrying in one direction. It was like thinking on time.
Here's a big piece of ocean floor.
Oh, look at that. Isn't that wonderful? Oh, look at
There in
that.
the front.
Isn't that perfect?
It's even more amazing if you see it on the top of a mountain.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yes. It's really crazy. Huh? 2,400 meters.
Yeah.
This is the bottom
And
of
this
the
is the
ocean.
bottom of the ocean, yeah.
For him, finding these remnants of the ocean floor,
It's very.
very important for him,
Yeah.
right? Because this really sets, in some sense, the stage of
Yeah.
his thinking about the history of this place. It's like a big
being
wedge that
tipped up.
fell out of the sky right into the landscape.
Yes. Yeah.
I have
here
to
it
guess
is now.
400 million years.
I think when you walk down a beach at low tide, you often get this ripple effect in the sand caused
Yes.
by the water.
Yes.
And also you often see these worm casts, which is the sort of cast of sand that the worms leave behind. And these ridges and pits are the positive and negative fossils, as it were, of those casts.
Robert Dycraft, who is investigating the beginning of time, the Andes turn out to be unexpectedly interesting.
So one impression I get looking at this landscape is just being a gigantic waves, like it's an enormous ocean, but I'm kind of frozen in time. And I think Darwin must have liked this ocean, because it's much more quiet.
Darwin noticed that a number of islands and coastal regions had been raised by the earthquake. And when he later found fossils in rocks that had been deposited in the sea, but were now 5,000 meters high in the Andes, he realized that many small shocks over a very long period could easily produce a mountain range. Charles Lyell, the great geologist, was right. Far from being created in 4004 BC, the formation of the Earth had taken a stupendous stretch of time. Sarah and Robert progressed further and further up the mountain, as well as regressing further and further back in time. They have gradually left their daily chores and their sense of the present behind, to lose themselves in the evidence of the many million-year-old forces around them.
If one imagines that Darwin was on a ship with 50 people, it's 1/3 the size of the Clipper, and they're all cramped together, and suddenly he comes out into the Andes and he's alone. Shortly before leaving the mountains, there was a very extraordinary view. Red, purple, green, and quite white sedimentary rocks, alternating with black lava, was broken up and thrown into all kinds of disorder by masses of porphyry of every shade of colour, from dark brown to the brightest lilac. It was the very first view I ever saw which really resembled those pretty sections which geologists make of the inside of the Earth.
¿Cómo están? ¿Bien? ¿Cómo estuvo el viaje?
The motherland.
Very traditional. Salud.
So what do you see when you look at the stars?
Well, of course, the most amazing thing is that we are actually looking at back in time. All of these stars are so far away that we really the light takes a long time to come to it. So many of these stars are easily 100 to 200 light years away. So people there would look back on us and they wouldn't see you.
Yeah.
So they would see Charles Darwin.
Charles Darwin looking at the stars in the Andes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Darwin, in a sense, put humans middle of mammals and stopped us being able to think that in some way we were sort of, I don't know, superior beings. How does this relate to astronomy?
Of course, in the old times, the Earth was the center of everything. And then around the time of Galileo, we started to realize that the sun is the center, at least, of the solar system. And then we discovered that the galaxy consists of 100 billion suns. And our sun is not a big sun. It's not a big star. It's just really average. And it's on an average place. So we're really average in all aspects.
It's quite funny, really, isn't it?
Yes, but if you start to wonder what is necessary for life on the planet, you see that in some sense the Earth is very lucky. It's all just right. We are not far away of the sun, not too close. There is a big planet, Jupiter, that keeps out most of the asteroids. And then suddenly you start to realize that in this huge universe, our little planet is very special.
Yeah.
With modern telescopes, we're starting to look further back in time. And finally, I think we're really approaching now the final frontiers, because we're looking back so far in time
Yeah.
that we're getting very close to the Big Bang. But of course, then you can ask, well, how did time begin? And this is a very deep question, and basically we have no clue.
I saw a big shooting star.
Oh, very
Yeah,
good.
good.
Hope you made a wish.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And it's this famous saying that we are made of stardust.
Yeah.
And that's literally true.
The knowledge Darwin gained here was decisive for the development of the theory of evolution by natural selection. He realized that the crust of the Earth was not ordained in eternity by God. It was violent, changeable, capricious, and immensely old. The creation of the Earth, according to Genesis, was a cardboard myth. The rocks told a different story. It made the nursery comforts of religion seem ridiculous. The Clipper set sail for Callao in Peru. Here, on the west coast of South America, the weather often changes drastically due to a phenomenon known as El Niño, the sudden heating up of the seawater. To add to this, the consequences of global warming can now be clearly felt here as well. These two phenomena together make Peru the perfect place to predict our possible future climate. On board the ship, we have been carrying out plankton research from the start. But at this stage of the journey, something special has occurred.
So I'm going to filter the water to get the plankton out. This stuff's the grass of the sea, really. It's what sustains all life in the ocean.
Wow, the water's really clear.
There it is. Virtually nothing.
The little filter indicates a fact that everybody on board was already suspecting. Clean, no plankton. That's the reason why birds and fish are nowhere to be seen. Not a single sign of life. As if we are sailing through the desert. This means that El Niño is on its way.
This is very El Nino condition sort of thing. And in fact, in a couple hours, when the blue skies are out, we can sort of sit there and say, there's no birds. The sky is blue. This is strange. El Nino is here.
El Niño also has a counterpart, La Niña. One brings cold, the other hot water to the coast in a perpetual oscillation.
So here we have the equator going along the Pacific. In the west, Indonesia, New Guinea. In the east, Ecuador, Peru, the Galapagos. The wind's cut off, which means that the waters that were pooled up here in the west move out towards the east, towards the middle or even the far eastern Pacific. And that warmth drives the formation of storm clouds and heavy rains over here in the east. It's very dry over in the west. Meanwhile, underneath the surface, the cool, nutrient-rich water stays far beneath the surface. And so, for the fish, it's bad. And for the birds, it might not even be enough food, so they would even die, or the fish would die.
The fishermen from Peru suffer the consequences of El Niño immediately. The amount of fish caught decreases rapidly. The sought-after anchovy remains so far below the sea's surface that it has become impossible to catch.
El agua está roja por lo que viene entrando la corriente del Niño. Y es un agua caliente. Anteriormente, cuando no había la corriente del Niño, el agua es cristalina, es verdecita, es color azul. Pero conforme va entrando la corriente del Niño, va cambiando las aguas. Baja el agua, lo que es el agua turbia, que es el agua caliente. Y trae todo lo que es la basura. Todo lo que es la basura. Y por ese motivo que los peces se alejan. Por lo menos aproximadamente de 5 a 6 meses esta agua se mantiene acá. Ahorita esta agua se mantiene 5 o 6 meses. De ahí de nuevo ya conforme va cambiando el clima, de nuevo esta agua se retira e ingresa de nuevo el agua, lo que es el agua limpia, lo que es el agua cristalina.
Sarah has descended from the Great Mountains to Lima. Darwin visited the city too, but was not particularly impressed by it.
We anchored at the Bay of Callao, the seaport of Lima, the capital of Peru. We stayed here for 6 weeks, but from the troubled state of the public affair, I saw very little of the country. During our whole stay, the climate was far from being so delightful as it was represented. A dull, heavy bank of clouds constantly hung over the land, so that during the first 16 days, I only had one view of the Cordillera behind Lima. These mountains, seen in stages, one above the other, through the opening of the clouds, had a very grand appearance. It almost became a proverb that rain never falls in this part of Lower Peru.
Beyond El Niño, Peru also faces rapidly melting glaciers, and that is a threat to the already scarce water resources. Sarah Darwin is accompanied by Julio Sierra Tres, a climate expert from the World Wildlife Fund, to the high mountains of the Andes.
Hola, me llamo Sarah. Hola.
Hace 20 años, de 15 a 20 años, esta zona era completamente diferente. Era blanco prácticamente por la nieve que existía. Pero desde ahí para acá, en 20 años, fíjese, ya no existe casi nada de nevado.
If El Niño does come, it is always in December, which explains the reference to baby Jesus. Together with Greg, I dig into an 18th century Peruvian yearbook in order to see how people dealt with the phenomenon.
Johann Reher, who was the first meteorologist in Peru who had an instrument observatory, wrote down some wisdom that one can get from looking at one's surroundings. And some of these things, so he'd say, we can see signs of a calm day by watching the flight of doves or mosquitoes or birds of prey. We know signs that the wind might pick up if you can see the Pleiades in the sky especially clear and can see every one of the little stars there. Or out on the sea if you see dolphins jumping from the water. Signs of pestilence, when the south wind blows but it doesn't rain. When there's an earthquake or famine. When reptiles or flies multiply in excess. One thing we can see from this particular almanac is a bit more interested in the prediction of the weather. And you can see accumulated in texts like this, or talking to farmers in particular, the way in which knowledge about the way the weather will look on a certain time of year will enable somebody to know this year is going to be dry. This year, I don't think I can plant that crop. Or around here in Peru, this is going to be an El Nino year. We need to watch out.
Sarah drives higher up into the mountains. She is on her way to the most important water supplier in Lima, at least until now.
So, what altitude are we at about now?
4,800 meters about.
4,000?
Yeah, it's not yet 5,000.
Right.
No.
And do I see just the remnants of a glacier there?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Up to 1990, recorded, all of this was covered with snow, and over there was perennial.
Covered in snow,
Covered in
12
snow.
months of the year.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, year after year, year in, year out.
Right.
And now you can see this little, even the peak, that is going to go out as well. See, the significance of this altitude is that all of these glaciers below 5,000 meters in the tropical Andes will melt, will disappear by the year 2020, 2025.
Right.
That is the scenario that has been predicted.
One of the predictions,
yes,
yeah.
based on evidence like this, the receding snow cap.
Now, this glacier is feeding water into this lake, am I right in saying?
Yeah.
And this lake is, in turn, feeding Lima drinking water.
Yeah.
So, if this glacier goes, what are the possible scenarios?
Well, the logical scenario is a chain reaction, because if this water is being filled with two sources, glacier and rain, and the glacier is definitely going, all we have to measure is the continuity of the rain. The extent to which deforestation and other human-made changes into the ecosystem are affecting the rain will tell us what will be the future of these lakes.
We may have a few different scenarios which could be...
The problem, Sarah, is that by the time we get our science right, it may be too late. We'll be standing here saying, you know, were we right or wrong, and then there will be no lake.
A glacier is the accumulation of years, decades, sometimes even millennia of snow and ice. The glacier is actually immune to El Nino. It doesn't matter if it's an El Nino event or not, because the glacier melts the same whether in El Nino or La Nina. Now the problem happens then when the glacier actually completely melts, and then suddenly you don't have this constant built-up water supply gently flowing down the river valley to the coast where it can be used. So in an El Nino year, actually that might mean there's more water available here on the coast of Peru, but in a La Nina year, it could mean that you have a great drought. And the glacier actually prevents that sort of up-down crisis in the water supply. When they're gone, it's going to make Peru much more vulnerable to the El Nino-La Nina cycle.
We have now sailed some 2,000 kilometers through seas without plankton or fish. The lifelessness can be compared to Peru's desert. And just as one may at times come across a desiccated animal corpse in the desert, here we come across a dead whale. But after days of this emptiness, we suddenly and unexpectedly spot a sign of life, and happily, one of my favorite species. How gracious they are. Pelican. Ah, that's fantastic. That's more pelicans in one place than I've ever seen. 62 years. Well, what a relief after those terrible days with no birds at all in your El Nino.
Oh, there's another piquero diving. I never get tired of seeing them dive into the water.
Thanks to a localized upwelling of nutrient-rich cold water, multitudes of microorganisms and fish come floating to the surface, which in turn attracts birds and dolphins. We are sailing through an oasis in the desert. A fishing boat heads straight for us. When the first officer tries to make contact, there is no reaction. So this is vaguely worrying. As it happens, we were briefed last night about what to do in case of an attack by pirates. The main advice was, keep your windows and doors locked and do not open fire with the heavy general-purpose machine guns which you do not possess. Let the lovely pirates take everything they might want. Nice pirates, cuddly pirates, they could be armed. Well, I see what you mean about that small boat. It's a line of guys in wetsuits with Kalashnikovs. They're off for a fishing trip. I think it's all right. They've just got rocket launchers.
They're watching us.
We just have to hope they kidnap you and then the entire American fleet, Pacific fleet will arrive. If they get me, it'll just be one fat man lost. Yeah, they got a net over the side.
Yeah, that's what I think that is.
That's disappointing. Slowly we see the dolphins and birds fade away and the desert looming again. We are back in bad waters, as the local fishermen call it.
Ya entró ya. El agua caliente. Agua caliente, sube pescado de agua caliente, mamá. Cambia la clase de pescado, lo cambia. Comienza a entrar, acá entra el pescado que le dicen pampanito, entra el pescado que le dicen ayanque, coco, entra uno que le dicen sierra, y ¿qué más entra? Raya, guitarra. Esos son los pescados que entran más acá, cuando cambia el fenómeno del niño. Pero a nosotros no nos conviene mucho porque esos pescados entran con el agua bien marrón, con el agua roja, pero cuando se va ese agua no hay nada. Así es aquí. Es una anchoveta.
¿Sobre tú uno?
Sí, uno. Recién uno. Vamos.
It is becoming increasingly hard for the fishermen to keep up with El Niño's cycle, let alone for all of the 9 million inhabitants to do the same. In the capital, Lima, water is not abundant. Hundreds of thousands of people are not connected to water pipelines and therefore depend on water trucks. How shall we solve our freshwater problems? Desalination plants? Who knows?
People don't act today because they want to see results tomorrow. Tomorrow, the longest tomorrow is 5 years from now. But the tomorrow of nature, the tomorrow of livelihood, is much longer than that. Look how long it took for this glacier to be what it was. and how little time it took to be what it is.
For a growing number of Earthlings, water is becoming a rare tourist attraction, as is the case here in a water park in Lima, where visitors can pay to spend the day among fountains. Better. Now, I think there are deep reasons why we love taking showers and baths. We're the only ape that loves water. You know, gorillas hate it, and chimpanzees hate it by and large. And in fact, the Congo River divides two entirely different species of chimps, the bonobo and the ordinary chimpanzee. And, it is lovely. And we like to take our holidays by the seaside, just going in the sea and lying in the sand. It's a deep part of our nature. It's not all to do with getting clean and having a shower before you make love. It's deeper than that. And I think, I don't know, it's going to be a difficult one, solving this water problem. Because as you can see, it's such a pleasure for all of us. Hey, Ann.
Yeah.
Can you get me a towel?
I'm not your servant, Reverend. Get it yourself.
No, a dry towel.
There's one in there, isn't there?
You watch it, you little devil. Yeah, all the future wars, they're all going to be about water. Just bring me a towel. Oh, gosh. The message in the rocks is constant change, but not always for the worst. We might be able to postpone the final countdown for a few billion years, after which some serious geoengineering will be needed. Simple little things like refueling the sun.